My mum was a medical secretary, my dad was a builder. My dad could see that I had a sort of creative streak, and there's a bit of a trickle of that through the business. My granddad used to draw architectural plans for an architect. My dad's a builder, so, quite a practical creativity. And I think he could see that I had a bit of a sort of graphics eye, and he said, why don't you be like a sign writer or something like that? Because that was kind of the world that's where his knowledge of creative careers sort of ended, was he knew somebody that painted your lettering on the side of your van when it wasn't an adhesive sticker. So there was definitely, people sort of could recognize I was going to do something creative, but it wasn't until I had an art teacher at A level, and she said to me, we had to pick a personal project, and she said, why don't you turn this project into a fashion project? And I thought, are we allowed to do that? Is that work? Like, it just seemed really frivolous to me that I could do that. And I just remember saving up all my money to buy like the Elle Catwalk magazines and Dazed and Confused magazine and The Face, and it was like a peak sort of 90s culture. And there was a real appreciation of Britishness at the time as well. Yeah. I remember that sort of, there was a music scene here. It was the whole sort of Blair and Oasis and the sort of Labour government and Tony Blair. And there was this, these sort of celebrity status musicians in Number 10 Downing Street. It was just, I remember it feeling like a really sort of buzzy time, and it was a huge time for creativity. So I look back now and realise that was part of the sort of the cultural tapestry where I was trying to figure out where I was going to go in that.
But I think what's interesting is that so it sounds like that as a kid you always had the creativity to do stuff and create stuff and cut stuff out. Because actually when you said it, because I think we're almost similar age, but it's that back when I was a kid, you used to get comic books and magazines and stuff where you would literally have a little character, I don't know if you remember this, and you would cut out the t-shirt and had little tabs that you would fold over.
So I loved all that stuff.
I'd forgotten.
I loved anything like that. Anything that was like sort of crafty, anything with a sort of fashion angle. I really was drawn to all of that. I mean, if you look back, I've got some hilarious photographs of me as a child, with a terrible home haircut, wellies on, but then I've got a belt on. I've accessorized. So you could tell even from an early age, there was something there. I was just out in the field.
No, I love it.
But I was already thinking, I want to be able to put an outfit together.
But I think that's almost when I always try and look at people and society and stuff, and I think you have your normal standard deviation of people, where I think a lot of people just go with the flow and they just do whatever it is they're told to do, and they get a job and they fall into it and they're happy to stay there. And I think often it is the kind of slightly rebellious outlier kind of people often go on to be entrepreneurs because they've got a passion about something. And it could be that you want to be a creative, you want to run a business, you want to do whatever it is, but I don't think everyone has that magic or that spark. That not everyone should. But the point is, I think for a lot of people, if you do have it, early on that you might not be able to know what it is that you want to do, but you want to do something, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things that happen there. So for me, there was kind of the permission to do so, to pursue it, which was, I mean, I possibly would have rebelled against that even if that hadn't been there. I don't think my dad was mad keen. He said to me, I remember him saying, how many fashion designers do you know that come from here? And I said, well, none. So I do remember thinking, but maybe I do know better than you, which is such a teenage rebellion, I suppose. So there was the permission to do so, but also I wasn't that good at art and design. So I wasn't sitting there thinking I'm destined for a creative career, because actually I didn't really have full permission to do so. And I wasn't, I was being told in art classes all the time, you're not good at drawing, you've got a D in art, you probably won't be able to study art at A level, you're going to have to pick something else. And when I picked my A levels, I picked graphic design, English and French. And after about 6 weeks, just thought I can't do the French. I really want to do art. And I had to really go and beg the art teacher to let me back in the art classes. And he was devastated. He was like, not again,
But the funny thing is that when you go to art galleries, because I'm posh and middle class now that we do that kind of thing and didn't growing up, but it's almost I remember going to Picasso and a lot of his stuff, the masters weren't good some of them were. They weren't good from birth. They just practiced and they just worked their asses off. And it's almost where very few, Mozart maybe, some people just get it and they're just savants at that one thing. But most people just work really hard and they love it and they go into the detail and they get better and they develop their own flair. But the point is, it's always easy to look at these world famous people and say, oh, well, they must have always been like that. And it's like, no, they just worked really hard at it and they enjoyed it.
I agree. I really believed, I mean, there was certainly somebody in my art class at A level who has gone on to be an artist. And I thought, you know, creativity, artistic flair was just something you either had or you didn't. And that's kind of what we got taught, that there was not really any progression for you to kind of get better at it. And I never felt like I was getting better at it, and I felt like I just was sort of trying to get through it. And when I applied to go to Newcastle College to do the art foundation course, which I'd heard about from the lady that ran the local art shop. And she said, oh, have you heard about this course? You should go there. And I used to go in and get my notebooks and my sketchbooks for my A-level art. And I said, oh no, I don't know anything about it. And she said, you should look into it. You should research it. You know, lots of kids from around here, if they choose a creative subject, they go to do this foundation course. It's a year long and you get to sample all of these different artistic outputs. So as soon as I heard that, I thought, right, I've got to get on this course. And then people would say, you know, well, they only take, I think, 700 students and they usually have about 5,000 applicants. And I was thinking, well, the chances of me being able to get in aren't that high. My interview there was a terrible experience. I mean, I got so grilled, but it was... I still say it was one of the best years of my life being at Newcastle College. It was finally the place where you could be creative. You were amongst other kids that were just like you. You know, you weren't at school where you were maybe different to everybody else. You were amongst a whole cohort of kids just like you. And it was a brilliant, and I remember the first day the course director said, you're all here to do one thing this year, and that is to make as many mistakes as you possibly can. And that was so liberating, having come from an A-level course where it was like, you can't use black and black's not a color and don't put outlines on things and the proportions all wrong, to being told just be creative, make mistakes, was so liberating.
Love it. So what happened next?
After that, well, I loved the fashion and textiles elements of the foundation course, and thought, well, maybe I want to specialize in fashion, and had a really supportive tutor there. And she said, you need to apply to Kingston University. It was one of the best courses in the country. It still is. And I thought, well, you know, that seems a bit of a stretch. But I applied, and there were two of us from my course that applied and got into Kingston. So off I went to Kingston, and I had a tough time there. I mean, the standard is extremely high with Kingston. I think the recruitment rate was something like 98% at that time. So everybody that went to Kingston was getting a job. So I knew statistically I'd probably do quite well there. But it was tough. And in my second year, I switched from studying women's wear to menswear, because I thought, oh, there are quite a few people on my course who are also women's wear designers, and their work looks a bit like mine. And if it comes to the crunch and we're both going to go for the same sorts of interviews, I think they're probably going to get picked over me, because again, my drawing wasn't great. So I switched to menswear. And that was a very sort of strategic move to make sure that I had a good job opportunity. And it did pay off. And in the Easter holidays of my final year at university, I used my grant in the days that when people got grants to study at university, and bought myself flights to New York with a friend of mine. We both went out there with our portfolios, and phoned up a recruitment agent and said, hi, we're about to graduate from Kingston University. Would you like to see our work? And she said, yeah, come and see me, and sent us both off for interviews that afternoon. And by the afternoon on the first day, I had been offered a job.
I both love the ambition, the naivety, and just the pure ballsiness to be like, I love it.
I mean, it's funny now to reflect on it. At the time, I just remember being so casual about it. It was like, I remember phoning my parents from a pay phone and saying, hi. And they said, oh, have you arrived? I was like, yeah, I've got a job. Wow. You know, and I think they were thinking, oh, she's been tricked, like something, she's been manipulated. She doesn't know what she's doing. She hasn't really got a job. And obviously I came back, and the company that offered me the job were called American Eagle Outfitters, which at the time, I mean, they were they were on the cusp of growth. And the first year that I spent with them, they grew 300% in that year. So I got to see what it was like inside a business that had transformed from being a sort of friendly, homely design studio. They were sat around, when I went for my interview, they were sat around the designers all sat around a round table with their pens, and it was all very cut and stick. And I was thinking, this is great. By the time I went back after I'd graduated, they'd moved into a new office. Everyone had computers all of a sudden, and it was corporate business. They grew massively, but it was really interesting to be inside a company and experience that level of growth. It gave me an appetite for, well, I just knew I couldn't ever go and work in a boring office job, because it was just exciting and we were doing so well all the time. So it gave me a real taste of what a fashion job can really be like.
So how did New York compare to rural Northumberland for a 20-something person?
Oh, I mean, it was just so exciting. And I lived when I first got there, somebody had supposedly set me up with this apartment, and then the apartment fell through. So I ended up in a terrible hotel for quite a few months, a really, really bad hotel, like dangerously bad, with a shared bathroom. And somebody in the room next door that seemed to pickle things. There would always be empty, giant pickle jars just with the pickling liquid in them outside. Really weird, really weird. So you can imagine what that was like, phoning home and explaining my glamorous fashion life in New York that was really living in this terrible hotel.
What kind of year period was this?
So that was 98.
Okay,
that was 98.
Because the reason why I'm going to ask is that so I was raised by my mum, and I remember it was about 98-ish. I wasn't obsessed, but we used to watch Sex and the City.
Yes.
But again, it was that same kind of period.
Yeah.
And it was just, I love New York anyway. I think it's my favorite place I've ever been to. But I can just imagine what it was like, and it's just getting involved, especially with fashion, because it's such a cutthroat. It's a cool industry. And we'll talk about some fashion related TV shows and food movies, and if they're anything like the real life. But I can just picture, and hopefully for people that might watch this, try and set the scene for where you were at that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the sort of aim for me was to live it. There was there's a building in New York called the Webster Apartments, and it's on like 34th Street and between 9th and 10th. So it's right in the heart of the city. You're right in the middle of it. And I needed to get into this. It's like a women's hostel, a working women's hostel. So the idea was you stay as long as you want. There were people there who'd lived there for 5 or 6 years. Wow. You had your room, you had shared bathrooms, and your meals got cooked for you in the sort of canteen. You got breakfast and dinner every day, but you were mixing with other girls, other women from all over the world who'd been drawn to New York for so many different reasons. Some people just like me that had gone after a job and needed a safe base to sort of start out. There was a woman there who was in her 50s from Texas who'd moved from a really dangerous marriage, and she'd always wanted to live in New York, and she'd raised her kids. So she came and got a job in New York. So you were mixing with all of these different people. And there was always somebody to do something with. There'd be 10 people that would go. If there was a new movie came out, there'd be people that would go to that. If there was a new bar that opened, there'd be 10 people going there. So it was a really nice sort of sisterhood, really, a really nice community, and just loads of fun. And I remember, I'd go out on a Wednesday night. I'd come home from work on a Wednesday and have my dinner and then go to bed till 11 o'clock, then get up and get ready and go out till like 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's what you do when you live in New York and you're 23.
Wow.
And I remember my boss the next day would always say, I used to think I was in trouble, and he'd say, come in my office, I've got pastries, tell me everything. I want to know which celebrities were out, what was happening. He just wanted all of the gossip. He said, I'm too old to go out and do all that stuff, but I want to know what's happening. So it felt really exciting and just loads of fun.
How would you feel if any of your kids wanted to do the same?
My son has already mentioned it. He keeps saying to me, I want to live in New York City and I want to have my own apartment. I don't want to share with anyone. And I keep trying to explain to him, like, we've all got to start out somewhere. But he's really ambitious and he doesn't quite know what he wants to do, but he's quite creative, but he's got the commercial mind. He's buying and selling stuff at school and all that kind of stuff. So, and he's got his own sort of eBay shop, and he probably will test my boundaries in the same way that I tested my parents' boundaries. as to what he wants to go on and do. So
But
yeah,
the
he
thing
already
is,
wants to do it.
but he probably has that view on the world because of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think he just thinks all that's possible. So
But
that's what I'm going
isn't
to
that
do.
amazing though? If you think about it, in one generation, just how the world is now so different to what it was in the 80s, 90s.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it'll be my standard question. So what happened next?